Okay, so I just want to do a bit of a demo, mostly with Revit, but then using some other tools afterwards to give you an idea of a typical workflow in an interior design project. So I'm going to begin with a new project. So in Revit, this is quite standard. You can begin with the architectural template, and you've got a shortcut for that on the welcome screen there. I'm just going to click there, and that will give me a new project file. I'm not going to do anything with that file right away, except obviously to create it. Now I'm going to go back and make another new file, and I'm going to use that to create my mass. So this is my mass model, which I'm making in what's called a family file. So it's called a conceptual mass. Just need to choose that one, metric mass. Click open. We've got this different workspace. So you can see we've got that grey background and it's set up in a 3D view already. And so I'm going to make my outline of my space just by drawing some lines. The size I want, that's a bit too big, yep, about that size. And I'll make it not just a standard boring shape, let's just make it a bit more interesting. And I might switch to doing a curve for one of these sides as well. There we are. So that's my space, plus the footprint of it. And now I'm going to select that and, similar to SketchUp, push-pull, I'm going to extrude that using that Create Form tool, and we've obviously given that a height. And then, similar to SketchUp as well, we can now start moving these edges to get some different geometry. So I want maybe get some of those to slope. I'll get this vertex corner, and again, we'll maybe something different, bring that the other way. So I've got some different geometry there, and maybe this one as well will bring out the other way, again, just something different. And maybe now I want to put in a bit more detail, so I'm going to select the whole thing and add what's called a profile, and just stick that in the middle, so I can then, so let's get the corner there. Oh, that's edge actually. There we are. So maybe move that one and get something even more interesting. There we are. So these are things that obviously SketchUp can't do, but Revit obviously has these different modelling tools, and maybe that's a little bit too deformed, that's not quite what I want, but yeah, I want a bit more interesting. There we are, that'll do. So that's going to be my facade with the, maybe a curtain wall or something that's going to be an interesting shape. The rest are more linear type faces, and maybe just to get some interest at the top, we'll bring this up and get a slope. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so that's the envelope of my new space. I'll probably come back and adjust that as we go, but that'll be to start with. So I'll then go and save that file. Okay, so now, to use that, I've got to load it into my project up here. You've got an option for that. It's fairly easy. Right, so this is now in my project. So the idea with Revit is you have families that you use basically for library parts. So your doors, windows, and that mass that I've just created there, all families that then get loaded into these project files. And the project files are the things that have most of your work. Definitely all your spaces and your buildings are going to be in a project. So you can see that I've got some levels. They're my stories, of course. And I'll just extend these a little bit and go and make some new levels. So I'm going to keep them all the same height. Okay, so that'll do me. But now I've realised, of course, that this level 3 isn't going to have much room above, not enough room for a ceiling there. So what I want to show you there is I can go back now and keep editing that family. And so I'll just bring up some of these faces, right, to make it all there. There we are. So I'll now load that back in, and of course the changes come straight through. So into the 3D view there, and I'm going to now start converting this into things that you're going to recognise. So I'll start by selecting that mass, and you've got a tool there to create floors or floor plates. So it's going to tick all of those levels. So I've got a floor plate generated from that mass for each story or each level. Yep, that's a brilliant tool. And so now I'll use the wall tool, and you can of course draw walls directly, but here I'm going to use this option to pick faces that I've made with the mass and create walls from them. Now that wall, so make sure it's facing the right way. Yep, it is. So I'll maybe put some brick walls on a couple of those faces, and we'll get some other kinds of walls there. Maybe I'll just get basic, we should have a block wall, there we go, block veneer. Looks for a different material, so that should be concrete block. A bit hard to see there, I'll just hide the mass so that you can see the material. Okay, so concrete block, and then the other one's brick. And I'll then put my nice curtain wall onto this interesting side there. There we are. And then maybe we'll put in some simpler walls. Well, I'll do a curtain wall for the one here on the right, and then I'll put in a solid wall again for the one that's left. Maybe I'll just do a plain wall there. There we go. Right, so I've done all of the outer surfaces, and then I'm going to put the outer walls, and I'm going to then put a roof onto the top with that roof tool there, and I'll just leave the default settings and just pick all those bits at the top and create a roof. And sometimes it doesn't like them, so I was pushing it a bit too far with the top there. There is a trick for making a roof there, but I don't want to go too far into tricks at this point, so what I'm going to do instead is go back and make that mass a bit simpler. So I'll go back, and I can always adjust that, of course, like I did before. So just going to bring this down and maybe flatten it. Okay, so really what I'm trying to show here is that you can adjust these individual vertex points. And very similar to SketchUp, also 3ds Max works in a similar way. And here we'll just get the thin lines so we can see it should snap and eventually go back to being flat. There we go, that's better. Now you can of course do sloping roofs, but I just want to keep it simple for now. So I'll load that back in. And this is where I think gets really interesting, because I'm going to of course overwrite to get my new changes to come across, but now the walls are still the way they were, so I'm going to select them, and you can choose to update those walls and make them follow the changes. Again, so the whole idea of parametric or a linked workflow. So everything's linked in a BIM program, but it's important that you choose when you want those links to update. You don't just want it to update without letting you decide. That's the important idea. So there we go, that's kind of interesting. So now back to putting on the roof. That should work just fine now, there we are. So I've done what I want with my mass, except I better put some floors in there, so I'll get some floors. And so that's when I can use those floor plates to create a series of floors for each level. There we are, don't worry about that message, that's fine. Okay, so there we are. So I've got my basic bounding geometry for my building. Don't worry about the floors going through there. And then to do some interior design, we can of course go and put some interior partitions. So things like the stud timber or steel, which is commercial, stud steel walls there. And I'll just draw a few of those to get a bit of interior layout happening, so I better check my levels. There we go, that'll do. Maybe just another, I don't know, toilet block or something over here. And put some doors in to make it look a bit like a real office or whatever it's meant to be. Loop. And I'll get some furniture. So go to component, actually just so that's clear, you've got doors and windows and the column tool, but everything else pretty much, furniture and most of the other things that you'll need to load are just components. So with that component tool, when you go to load family, so you might realise families are your library parts, and going to the furniture folder there, we've got a series of furniture that come with the program, so when you install Revit, you'll have all of these things there ready to go. But then we've got a more extensive library for you here when you go to the P drive and then go to interior design. There's a folder called Revit Library, and you'll see a lot more families in there. So when you go to furniture there, you'll see again a lot more. So maybe I'll just get some office type furniture for now. And you can see over here we've got a few different versions of that chair, so I'm just going to choose the 3-seater one and put in some seats at the same angle as my wall, if it will snap to that. Come on. It doesn't want to. Yeah, that's because of the mousing. I'll get this one instead. There we are. That'll do. Okay, so I've got a couple of chairs, and so maybe I'll get some people. So again, load family. They are in the entourage folder. So we'll get some, we'll start with the females and we'll put some men in afterwards. And we'll get union. There we go, stick it in here. Okay, so I've got a few things, maybe I won't even worry about putting the men in, and now I will make a camera view so we can start to see how that space looks from the inside. So there we are. And maybe we'll do another one looking towards that curtain wall, so I might even just copy that furniture and the person down in that direction so that we've got something to look at. Oops. There we are. And I'll do another camera going that way. Now, one thing that's missing, you'll see if I render that, we'll just go to interior. The glass will come up, but it doesn't have a frame. It's got panels that are divided up, but it's going to look a bit strange because, again, there are no mullions or frames on that glass. So I'm going to come back to that wall and just put some frames on that before I then take it further for rendering. So what do I need? Just interior types here. Yep. That'll do. Okay, so now you can see, if you look closely, there's a frame there automatically. Okay, so now, because of the geometry, it's struggling a bit with that glass, but I'll live with that for now. We can fix that later. So then, just to quickly come back to rendering, you would have seen that it was very bright, mostly because of the direction of the sun, but also because of this idea of exposure. So it's overexposed. Too bright. So that can all be controlled at the rendering stage, just like you can with a camera. It's the same basic idea. So I'm going to make this darker. I'm going to get some of the detail to come back. But also, the sun is pointing directly at the camera, and that's usually not a good idea. So I'm going to just come back and turn the shadows on. Oh no, it's not, sorry. It's behind the camera. Or to the right. So I'm just going to come back though and adjust that. So I'll go to the sun and we can change the angle. So I'll use the time here to change that and bring it around so that maybe, well, let's bring it so that it comes into the space. If we come back around, let's go for winter, might be better, because it'll be more of an angle. And so I should go for the morning. Still not enough. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the plan because I didn't think about which way north is. Okay, so where our building is basically facing south, or the windows are on the south side. Now, that would be not a good idea in the southern hemisphere because the sun comes from the north. But in the northern hemisphere, that would be perfect. That's what they do in the northern hemisphere. They orient the buildings south. So what I'm going to do is say to Revit, we're in the northern hemisphere. So I don't have to flip my building around. Yep. So here you can choose your location. Yep. So it's picked up that we're in Canberra because I think some of our servers are actually there. You've got Sydney in the list there when you need it. And you can do any location you like. Yep, yep, it's brilliant. But I'm going to choose just anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. In fact, I'll choose the other Sydney in Canada. That'll do. So now you can see the sun is coming from the other side. And when I bring this around, you'll see we're going to get shadows coming through those windows. So let's go right around. There we are. So you can see the shadows there. It's in their summer, so I want this to be in winter to get more of an angle. So winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and there we go. So when I come back to render, of course, it's going to use that direction for the sunlight. Yep. Now, very bright. The sun is very bright, but again, that's when we can use exposure control to correct for that. There we go. So that's rendering with Revit. But as I said before, it's actually a good option to take it into 3ds Max for rendering. So I'm going to show you how easy that can be. It's a fairly simple process. So it'll be a while before we get to this, but I just want to give you an idea where you can go with it. So I'm just going to make what's called an FBX file. And now in 3ds Max, I can link that to it. Over here, that one. There is an option to link Revit. It's not as good as this, but it works. Yeah. Well, it makes an FBX file for you, basically. So, so it's better just to manually make the FBX usually. There we are. So I'll just leave all the defaults. So if you're going to try this, there's one shortcut to remember. It's easy to remember. C the camera. So C on the keyboard sets the camera view that you had in Revit in 3ds Max. So that now can be rendered, and you can do a little bit more with it than you can in 3ds Max. You can do a couple of quick settings to make it work properly. Oh no, it's basically interior. So I'm just going to render with bring that exposure value up a little bit too close to what I had. Let's see. So here, this exposure is probably a little bit more involved than the one in Revit, but it's basically doing the same thing. So here now, if I bring that up, you can see very similar results in the preview there to what I had before. And so now I'll do a full render. And there we go. But what's missing? The person, exactly. Not everything is compatible. So those people, they're what's called RPC. RPC just means rich photorealistic content. It's a brand name thing. This company called Arcvision, or Archivision, I guess Arcvision. And they sell people and trees and other things. And essentially they gave a bunch of them to Revit to use. And they work in Revit, but they don't work when you bring them into 3ds Max. It does. Yeah, that's right. It's got its own RPCs. Yeah, that's right. So they work perfectly in there. So that's good. But even with those RPCs working, there's a pretty limited selection. So usually the best approach, and people do get very picky about entourage, the designers especially, because they want the presentation to be designed as a whole and to be, stylish and look good. And those people are generally pretty daggy, and they're all the same, and there are only about 15 to choose from in total. So if everyone's using the same people, that's a problem. And if you want to do more graphical people, often it's better to have more of a stylised person than a full-blown photorealistic person. So a lot of people will even draw people and scan them in and then overlay those on top of their renders. So to do that, you can then, of course, export the render. So you'll save the file. And, right, so save the file and make sure you save it in a format like even a JPEG, but do you know any of the other formats apart from JPEGs that are used for saving rendered things or pixels, anything that's made of pixels? Yeah, TIFF. TIFF is the best one if you want the highest quality. TIFF is really good. But it's just a quick thing. JPEG's fine, and PNG is another useful one. So I'll use PNG. And I'll just call it test render. Okay, here just leave it on the defaults and it's fine. Even the 48-bit is insane, but do that. So then come back and in Photoshop, where's it gone? Sorry, I thought I'd saved it there. Oh, maybe it's gone here, yes. Okay, so that can of course be opened then in Photoshop. Notice it's got a nice transparent background. So I can put my own background in here as well. And I can put some people in. So I've got some people, of course, which I'll just go and grab. You can all get to these people if you go to the same interior design folder under material images. There's a bit of a selection of people. You'll find a lot more if you just go searching online. So I'll just get something from here. Yeah, that'll do. Yep, okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste from there into here, and he's huge, yep, he's high resolution, and so I'll just stretch him down. If you want to do the shortcut, it's Control-T to scale and rotate and do all those things in Photoshop. That's what I'm doing there, Control-T, and then stretching. I've got to come down a bit more actually. That'll do. Okay, so that's it. So, right, so you can add your people, another entourage in Photoshop, and because I can, I'll show you a background. So you can put those in. That's really good as well. Backgrounds are an option with any of your rendering programs. You usually have an option to put an automatic background or choose an image. But can you think about any reasons why that can cause problems when you're trying to put images in as an automatic background with a 3D render? That is absolutely, definitely one of the issues, yep. Lining up, getting the perspective right, or getting the angles to work together with certain backgrounds especially. The other main issue though is that the lighting is done at that stage. So it's going to affect the brightness of the background when you are changing the lighting or the exposure with the things you're rendering. It's quite hard to control those things together. And if you don't have to, then why do it? So if you do your backgrounds in Photoshop, it's much easier to control these things separately. So I'll just get a background from here. Any of these will do. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so again, copy and paste. So Control-C, Control-V, and Control-T to move it around. And how easy is that compared to doing it in the render? Much easier. Okay, so that's a pretty typical workflow. Revit to sometimes another program for rendering, and then into your graphics program like Photoshop to do all your post-production and adjustments. Yes, absolutely. Yes, of course. But that's all recorded. Yes, that was real-time speed. Yeah, but that's all been recorded. So I'll give you the video as well. But now we're going to go on to a tutorial with Revit where you're actually going to go a bit more slowly and learn the steps, how to use the program,